Hello and welcome to Cinema Explorer. I'm Moksh.
And I'm Muskan.
And today we'll review Looop Lapeta.
Looop Lapeta, the new Netflix release, is an official remake of the German film Run Lola Run. It stars Taapsee Pannu and Tahir Raj Bhasin as Savina and Satya. It all starts when Satya loses a mobster's cash and it is up to Savi to race against time to save him.
But to do so, she has to go through a lot of challenges, the biggest of all, the time loop she's stuck in. The first thing that we should talk about here is how true this remake is to the original Run Lola Run.
Now, Run Lola Run was a 1 hour 15 minute long film, and somehow Akash Bhatia, the director, has made this film into a 2 hour 11 minutes of runtime. So, where does this one extra hour come from? In this film, there are a lot of added characters, supporting actors, and a lot of subplots that are in the film. But in case of Run Lola Run, that wasn't the case. It was just a short story of Lola running to save Manny's life.
These extra characters, these subplots, well, some of them work and some of them just completely miss the mark. One thing Looop Lapeta does is, it just not shows one character or one supporting character, it goes into their story as well, which does not work. But when it comes to Taapsee Pannu and Tahir Raj Bhasin's character, Savi and Satya, they show their backstory, which was not in the original film, and it still somehow works for us because we kind of get attached to these characters, we care for them, which was not the case in the original. One thing which worked really well for the original film was the anxiety-inducing urgency that it had. In that short duration of time, it was so rapid, so fast, everything was going on so quickly that you were completely invested in those things and didn't even care about the fact that the characters were not much introduced to you. Their story was not told to you, where they come from, what they do, or anything else. But in the 2 hour 11 minute runtime of Looop Lapeta, that urgency somehow gets lost. It gets in the backseat.
One thing that is pretty commendable about the film is, even though it does not match the stature of the presentation and craft of Run Lola Run, but it is still a pretty well-made film. Not a well-made remake to say so, but a standout film. One thing we have to keep in mind is that it is an adaptation. It is not a frame-to-frame remake, and it never tries to be so. It has adapted it into an Indian context, which is a pretty commendable thing, I guess.
That's true. Some of the subplots and some of the angles that they try in this film are completely in line with the Indian audiences and will completely relate to them. And that was really funny. And one aspect when we come to funny is that they tried to make the film into somewhat of a comedy, which the original was not. Original was a thriller, and this one turned into like a comedy movie which had its own version of thrill and its own version of creativeness to it. But the comedy aspect is probably hit and miss. Some jokes land pretty well with me, and some were just not good enough.
Run Lola Run had a very creative and unique style of animation which was used in the film, and very good editing techniques. And entire visual presentation was pretty good. And even this film has a pretty distinct visual style, which is not a copy of Run Lola Run. It is a very own style of the director. In terms of the direction of Akash Bhatia, we have seen in many of his commercials, he has a very distinct visual style, a very strong color palette and different camera angles. He likes to be experimental.
He likes his camera to do the talking.
Yeah.
He likes it to move around. He likes to experiment with the camera. And I think he was a very good choice for this particular film because of the original.
One thing that makes the film stand out is its technicalities. The red and green color palette, the beautiful compositions, the production design, and even the music of the film. Everything works very well for the film. What we loved in the film was the creative use of camera. The different angles, the weird positions of the camera, and different styles. It felt a little experimental, which is really fresh in terms of the style we are seeing in Bollywood.
For Indian audiences, I think the use of camera was really experimental, as we said. And some of the shots, especially like the first shot, the opening shot, the way camera moves around the room. There's one particular shot when the camera just goes around like this. And it feels so nice, so refreshing to see something like that in Indian cinema. And that was a really big positive for the film. The editing of the film is really well done. In some of the scenes, they are able to bring together different perspectives of all these characters in a very creative manner. The use of fast cuts, cut-ins, and some of the transitions give a very quirky tone to the film.
Coming to the performances, let's first talk about Tahir Raj Bhasin. Tahir is having a great year. He had a great start with Ye Kali Kali Aankhein, Ranjish Hi Sahi, and now Looop Lapeta. And he is the one character who has shined throughout the film.
He's having a lot of fun. The way he delivers his dialogue, the body language he has, and the comic timing, they all fit in with the quirky tone of the film. Seeing his recent performances, and especially in Looop Lapeta, he has definitely become one of our favorite actors, and we'd like to see him more on screen. We'd like to see him take up different roles, and he looks really promising in a comic role as well.
Coming to Taapsee Pannu, she felt like a little bit of a misfit for the role. Although her athletic body language was on point because of her practice in Rashmi Rocket, but here her comic timing felt a little off.
Of all the supporting characters, and just to remind you, all these characters were added in this particular film. Appu and Gappu were the pick of the lot. They were hilarious throughout the film and they had actually something to add to the film. Other characters felt like they were just there and they didn't add anything and they just created kind of a mess for the film. Appu and Gappu were really a delight to watch. The entire angle involving Mamlesh jewelry store and Appu Gappu, that really worked for us. We found it to be the best part of the film and that is something to say because it was all added in Looop Lapeta and was not in original film.
Now let's talk about the most problematic aspect of the film. What really dragged down the film was its writing. It was written by 4 writers and they just created a mess of it. The dialogues felt very forced and very cringy in parts. There were a lot of repetitive lines. Like the way they say 50 lakh, it is literally repeated 1,000 times in the film.
Even though the original also does a very similar thing where they repeat the lines, but it still does not feel irritating. But here the way they do 50 lakh, it kind of feels irritating after a point of time.
The dialogues are trying too hard to be funny to lure the Indian audiences, of course, because Indian audience wants comedy in literally every film, otherwise they would just dump it. But here the humor feels forced.
It's almost like even if you want to show something serious to the Indian audiences, they'll be like, where is the humor? I want to laugh. I want to have a good time. I want to forget my problems. And that is what they tried to do here and that didn't work out.
If they hadn't tried so hard in this film to do that, it would probably be a better thriller. What it should have been.
But maybe that's something we should look at and see that they tried to do something different. They wanted to give it a little bit of a comedic feel. But the trouble was the elongated runtime of the film. Maybe crisp it down by 20 minutes or 30 minutes maybe and you might have a great film.
When we watched the trailer of the film, our biggest concern was how will they manage with the time loop factor. What we expected was that they will dumb down the entire time loop thing for the Indian audiences and they did exactly that. They tried to acknowledge the fact that the time is repeating and she is rebooting and it did not work very well because it was only her who was realizing that. No one else in the film is shown that they are realizing that it is everything repeating.
No, actually there's one particular character who is in the wedding who sees Taapsee's character and he's just going and he's suddenly remembering something. So if the characters know that they're in a time loop, I don't think that works. If like for one character it can work, but in the original they do not acknowledge that fact. Even though the characters might know that they're in a time loop, they still try to do something which is different and they don't talk about it. But here Taapsee is continuously talking about, oh, I'm still alive and different things. So that does not fit well. Along with the use of humor, another thing that has been plaguing Indian films is the use of preachy, melodramatic dialogues and monologues at the very end. And I don't know how and why they tried to do the same thing here as well.
Somehow they try to give a moral to the story. Keep trying, keep trying. There is literally no need to spoon feed the audience and consider to be so dumb and just lecture them on moral values. It has to stop.
Please stop it, Indian writers
Petition
and Indian
in the
directors. Because we are sick of the middle class movies constantly just going on these morals, giving you a lecture in the very end. We kind of understand the themes we are talking about. We don't need a lecture at the very end. We don't need a monologue. And in this particular film, Looop Lapeta, there is a monologue by a character who is not even important. And she goes on and that is just too much. And that is something that Indian directors should stop doing.
One more thing that the film is trying to do is create analogies. It is clearly visible that the names of the characters are taken from Satyavan, Satya and Savitri, Savi, and there is no need to keep an entire sequence where the story of Satyavan and Savitri is being retold in the film.
The whole analogy does not fit well with the film.
Another thing we loved about the film was how it tried to acknowledge its original source material. We see a homage paid to Run Lola Run when the character of Lola runs in a casino when Taapsee is just coming out of it.
Overall, Looop Lapeta is a very enjoyable film which is somewhat engaging. Even though the film cannot be deemed as a very well-made one, but it is very experimental and that works very well. If you haven't seen the original Run Lola Run and you directly go for Looop Lapeta, you will enjoy it quite a lot and you will not be comparing it like us. Finally, the film is able to stand apart from Run Lola Run and it is a really good thing because it has been quite a long time since we have seen something done creatively even though it is a remake.
If the writing of the film would have been a little bit better, we would have loved it a little bit more than we do now. Overall, our rating for the film is 3 out of 5 stars. Do tell in the comments below what do you think about Looop Lapeta.
And don't forget to like and subscribe and support the channel. See you guys next time.